big effort, perhaps at the round table around the issue of the responsibility of the classroom to the community, especially what we should discuss it. And most likely with what is about to be discussed.
Okay, good afternoon everyone. Let me begin by saying that I'm delighted to be here to share with you some of my ongoing research on Amsterdam Avenue. This is very much a work in progress, so I'm welcoming your feedback and suggestion because I think it will shape the future direction of the project. So to start, this is a project that tries to understand the social life of the entire length of Amsterdam Avenue. So it focuses on one avenue, 10 neighborhoods, 74 census tract, 412 street blocks, and began roughly at 14th Street and ends at 220th Street. This map on the right-hand side shows you, roughly speaking, the proportion of non-Hispanic whites by census tract. And you can see in the green line, 125th Street, which is roughly the dividing line, as you know, for most of Manhattan. And then Amsterdam is basically that big avenue in blue right there, starting in West Chelsea, going up to Hell's Kitchen, Upper West Side, Manhattan Valley, Morningside Heights, where we are, which is right here, Manhattan View, Hampton Heights, Washington Heights, and Inwood. So we were rather ambitious when we began this project because we wanted to study the entire length and not just any particular neighborhood. And the reason for that was because we wanted to compare and contrast neighborhoods that are changing quickly with neighborhoods that are staying relatively stable over time. So there are three major questions that basically frame the entire project. One is, how has Amsterdam Avenue changed over the last 5 years? And our focus there is about post-recession changes. Second, how do local residents and businesses understand and make sense of the tremendous changes that are happening around them? And what do these changes reveal about the global transformations in this wonderful city of ours? So for those of you who might not be a sociologist, gentrification refers to a process by which central urban neighborhoods that have undergone disinvestment and economic decline experience a reversal, a reinvestment, and the in-migration of a relatively well-off middle class and upper middle class population. So our project basically built on prior work, and this is the only slide I'll spend on prior literature, which has focused on the origins of gentrification, the tremendous diversity among the gentrifiers. Some are obviously young, white, middle-class professionals, but increasingly the upwardly mobile minority population are also now gentrifying parts of our city, so it's no longer just white. It also reviews something about the social neighborhood, the hierarchical, if you will, the racial order of the city, and it often highlights both race and class dynamics. I'll come back to that in the next slide. Lots of work have also focused on the consequences of gentrification from, displacement, my colleague Lance Freeman here, to issues of cultural conflict and also the loss of community and, more importantly, a sense of authenticity at the neighborhood level. Our work moves the entire literature forward by highlighting what we call hyper-gentrification, a concept that we're developing in contrast to what we know about gentrification, which is the influx of middle-class white residents into formerly disadvantaged and minority neighborhoods, which are often going to lead to displacement of the working class and the working poor. Hyper-gentrification, in contrast, is the situation where you have the influx of the wealthy and the global elite into formerly upper middle class neighborhood, and that often leads to the displacement of the middle class residents, which then trigger the displacement of the working class. So you can see that these processes are basically linked in the ways in which the neighborhoods that we have focused on are contiguously linked as well. And finally, we argue that this is increasingly characterizing the situation of many global cities, including New York, London, Shanghai, Beijing, and Tokyo. So just to give you a sense of this project, I have used the term we because I'm referring to the 10 students who are working with me on this project. 6 are doctoral students and the other 4 are undergraduate students at the college. And what we did initially with this project was that we wanted a project that is large enough in scope to be inclusive of all of the students who are interested in working on this, and that's why we assign each student to one of the 10 neighborhoods along Amsterdam, and each of them has unique autonomy and independence over their own neighborhood. So in some sense, they become an expert of the neighborhood over time. And collectively, what we're hoping to do with this project is we're going to create new knowledge that will inform how different parts of the city are connected in this broader sense of inequality, if you will. Just a quick sense of the data and methods behind this project. We did ethnographies of the 10 neighborhoods. We did a pilot set of interviews with 30 businesses in the spring of 2014. And then we learned very quickly that we were onto something because everyone was excited about what we were asking them about. So we launched the real project, which included roughly 140 interviews with both businesses and local residents in the fall of 2014. And we just finished the collection as of March of 2015, this spring. What we also did was observing every single street block along Amsterdam, both the west and east side of Amsterdam, using a standard instrument that we refer to as the Systematic Social Observation Instrument, or SSO. This is borrowed from urban sociology. So we have data on the physical and the social characteristics of every single street block of Amsterdam. And then finally, we also dropped about 1,600 letters along Amsterdam. And the lost letter experiment refers to the idea that we drop letters that are pre-stamped and self-addressed to a PO box, and we wanted to measure systematically how the return rate would vary by neighborhood, and that gives us an indicator, if you will, of what we call other regarding behaviors or social altruism at the neighborhood level. The data is very much fresh on our mind, but in the interest of time, I'll just focus on the interview data with the businesses today because the limitation. But I'm happy to talk to you more about everything else in the Q&A. So Amsterdam, what was now Amsterdam Avenue was laid out in 1811. The commissioners planned as 10th Avenue and opened from 59th Street to 4 George Avenue in 1816. The name was changed from 10th Ave to Amsterdam Avenue in 1890 in a bid on the part of the West Side landowners to confer some measure over cachet, if you will, to their real estate investments. And that new avenue name supported the speculators' claim at the time that this section would become the new city, or new Amsterdam, if you will. Here are two maps just to give you a sense of the ethno ratio, but also the immigration concentration. What you see again above 125th Street is basically the darker shades of red, and that signal basically high levels of concentrated disadvantage on the left-hand side, and on the right-hand side, high levels of concentrated immigration. And of course, everyone in the city knows that above 125th, we have large communities of Dominicans, but also Spanish-speaking Latinos overall. And then where we are on Morningside Heights is roughly kind of right here. And I'm sorry this one is not working, but it's roughly right there where we see above the Central Park map. So Amsterdam, we chose it for a strategic reason. One is the only continuous avenue that runs north to south, cuts across ethno-racially diverse neighborhoods, and also socio-economically diverse neighborhoods, because we wanted to capture the entire diversity. There's also a mix of housing projects among other academic institutions, Columbia being one of them, and so a mix of both commercial and residential. We wanted that as well. And then finally, it was just the ease and accessibility to these neighborhoods. Our students can actually go back again and again and again. But finally, theoretically, we were very interested in what we call major transformations to the neighborhood. And that included at least two of them. In West Chelsea, which I'll take you to at the end of this talk, there's the highlight, which basically transformed a formerly industrial city into something that's very vibrant and hyper-gentrified. And in Hell's Kitchen, we have the Hudson Yard redevelopment project, which, as some of you might know, is the largest real estate redevelopment project in the entire city right now, which basically would be roughly about $2 billion, actually let me say that again, about $21 billion going to be poured into that intersection alone. So as you can see on the left-hand side there, you have a ton of housing projects, and also on the right-hand side, I'm sorry, let me reverse myself. The left-hand side, you have tons of housing projects, and the left-hand side, you have a lot of local institutions. including, the various colleges right there, and that is really the very diversity that we're trying to capture, if we could. So what we're seeing next is obviously, coincidentally, we ran into this series of newspaper articles in the New York Times in 1955 about America and our changing city. And one of the articles focused exactly on the same exact neighborhoods that we're studying today. And this is pure coincidence. And this article concluded that a characteristic of West Side life, the article noted, is the mixture of races and nationalities in run-down neighborhoods with antiquated housing in close proximity of modern houses and apartments with all the comforts and conveniences. We argue this is still true of the West Side today, but in a highly differentiated form. We'll get that in a second. So just quickly, the New York story. We are at a moment of a housing affordability crisis with increase in median rent over the last decade alone. And you can see is the increase in New York is particularly acute compared to the rest of the United States, which had basically 44% increase. There's a decline in affordable housing, and this is why the affordable housing issue is such a signature issue for the current mayor, Bill de Blasio, because over the last decade we have lost 400,000 apartments, which rented for less than $1,000, and there's also a loss of 140,000 rent-stabilized units. And rent stabilization, as you know, is one of the most important programs in the city that helps keep housing affordable for a lot of working class, but also the low middle class residents of the city. And there's also, at the same time, the decline in real income. While rents have gone up, incomes have stagnated over time. And that basically led to this crunch that is mostly felt among especially the elderly and the poor and the working class residents of the city, and especially among the low-income renters. You can see that the rent-to-income ratio has increased from 33% in 2000 to about 41% on average in 2012, which essentially is telling us that they're basically rent burdened, because you shouldn't be spending more than X amount of your income on rent. Here is a slide that I'll skip, but this is just to say that what's happening in New York is really emblematic of what's happening across the country, but New York is also the tip of the iceberg, the most kind of extreme case, both in the rent increase, but also in the median home value across the city. So this crisis, according to the report that was released by the New York City Department of Housing and Preservation and Development, is a crisis in many ways that was built on New York City's success. If we were not as successful, people would not have wanted to come to live in our city, and this is sort of artificial, but it really is telling us that we have done something well. And that success story has also at the same time put pressure on housing stock, where more and more New Yorkers are spending more and more to cover their housing costs, and entire neighborhoods have basically lost their affordability. Here's a slide on kind of Spike Lee's take on gentrification. Why does it take an influx of white New Yorkers into basically the South Bronx in Harlem, in Bed-Stuy, in Crown to get the facilities to get better? And for those of you who know New York, you remember that the South Bronx had some of the most impoverished census tract in the city, if not in the country, in the 1990s, right? So the revival of the South Bronx, of Harlem, of Bed-Stuy, of Crown Heights is shocking. But more importantly, this also highlights the race and class dynamics, right? I'll jump across because I won't read everything on the slide. When you see white mothers pushing the babies in strollers at 3 o'clock in the morning on 125th Street, that must tell you something, that something is happening in the city. For those of you who are not from New York City, this is basically the entire city in your hand. We have 5 boroughs, 59 community districts. That basically is built on about 195 neighborhood clusters. And these are basically meaningful units like Upper West Side and West Village and so on. And that is based on 2,216 census tracts, which is the unit that the census used to count local community, roughly 4,000 to 8,000 people per tract. Here's a map of gentrification between 1990 and 2000. What you can see here is this is where gentrification began. The darkest shades of blue are basically the neighborhoods that were gentrifying during that decade. I'll skip ahead. This is the next decade, since 2000 to the current present moment. What you're seeing here is that those neighborhoods that have gentrified are now intensifying the gentrification of other neighborhoods that are proximate to them. And again, if you look at that map, above 125th is basically where a lot of the actions are. That include Inwood and Upper Manhattan, the exact neighborhoods that Joseph just referred to in his presentation. So this intensification, if you will, happen not by coincidence, by design and by policy, something I'll come back to at the end. Just to give you some of the reference points, so in 1990 and 2000, we have 51 of the 2152 tracts gentrified, and then next decade we have 128. And that doubling, if you will, is the intensification of gentrification that I was trying to refer to. Let me now tell you a bit about kind of hyper-gentrification. Most of you have seen this article in the New York Times about the stream of foreign wealth and the global elite buying up basically condos in our city. These are elite kind of New York real estate, which basically meant that every penthouse is selling for $100 million. The types of pricing that is above and beyond even upper middle class Americans. We're talking about the global elite here. And the reason why they're coming to our city is because we have great housing stock, but more importantly, compared to the international standards, New York real estate at $2,500 a square foot is affordable compared to Beijing, Shanghai, London, and Paris. And given the political and economic stability in our city, I wasn't kidding, it's true, we are much more affordable. Outrageous pricing, I know, for any academics, but we are much more affordable by international standards, and this is why we're attracting those foreign flows. And it's not just at the top one center, but also 157. For those of you who know anything about New York City, 157 is the third tower right there. It's 1 West 57th Street, and West 57th Street over the last decade has been renamed Billionaire Row, because that's basically where all of the wealth is now concentrated. And the Time Warner Center is basically right around Columbus Circle at 59th Street. And what you see is that all of the international profile who have bought up many of these condos. One other thing you note in this photo from the time is the fact that some of these boxes are essentially dark at night. So the idea here is obviously, what does it mean for the social fabric of the city when half of the people who actually purchase these condos do not live here? Yeah. This is referring to the process of the phenomenon whereby the global elite is basically parking their money into these different condos, and these different condos are often referred to as deposit boxes in the sky, literally. So that's what it meant to own one of these places. The controversies around this is coming back to kind of socioeconomic distinctions, right? The idea of a rich door, poor door, and you have heard this debate as well. The idea of a poor door is basically affordable housing units that are being set aside in the same building, but there's a separate entrance for those who are renting an apartment for $1,000, whereas the rich who pay $25 million for a condo unit would want their own luxury condo, right? And Navarro, writing in the New York Times, basically noted New York has always been an economically diverse city, which everyone rubbing shoulders with millionaires and the Bohemian Amazons. But the poor door image tapped into the anxiety of many New Yorkers. The city is becoming livable only for the wealthy. And this is increasingly the case for the rest of Manhattan, not just the neighborhoods that I'm looking at right now. So let me say a final word on hyper-gentrification and socioeconomic mixing, which has to do with the direct consequences of the High Line Hudson York redevelopment project. And in that sense, I'm just using one case study to highlight the broader process across the 10 neighborhoods because I wanted to give you some time for Q&A as well. So to remind everyone, we are trying to develop a typology of gentrification in this work. So in contrast to, again, prior work which focused on the dichotomy of gentrifying and non-gentrifying, we're arguing that at the top, you see in West Chelsea and Hell's Kitchen, hyper-gentrifying neighborhoods that are basically experiencing a lot of change because of the High Line. That's in York. And then from the upper side, roughly up to 125th, you have basically what we call gentrified neighborhoods. Neighborhoods that have been gentrified 10, 20 years ago. And then above 125th, we have Manhattanville, where our new campus is coming up, but also our students are being displaced from Morningside Heights, and they're now increasingly living in Hamilton Heights, where it's much more affordable. And finally, at the tip of the island, in Inwood and in Washington Heights North, everything is still very much the same. So that is what we call non-gentrifying neighborhoods. And this design will allow us to compare and contrast the unique processes that are happening in each of these types of neighborhoods. And for the rest of the talk, I will just focus on the hyper-gentrifying neighborhoods. So here's West Chelsea, which is dropping from 14th Street to 32nd Street, west of 8th Avenue. And the highlight has basically been the biggest change in this neighborhood. What you see here on the right-hand side at the bottom is 3 different color lines: phase 1, phase 2, phase 3. And each section, if you will, the highlight has been developed over time such that the final section, which is the third section, which is the purple, looping around at the top, basically brought you all the way out to the waterfront. You can actually see into Jersey, right? And this basically is bringing in a lot of life in the neighborhood, okay? So one of the respondents that we interviewed said the highlight definitely brought energy into the street, an energy that was so such hours to be believed. This place was just so deserted, you know. But once the news of the highlight, the promise of the highlight came about, everybody started to renovate, to move into these buildings. And what's also important for me to note is 10th Avenue is directly below the highlight, literally 10th Avenue in Amsterdam. Our focus of the study is right below the highlight. So you actually see the transformation that has just happened over the last 10 years ago, over the last 10 years. So here's David Hoydish, the owner of Highlight Studios. He said, this is reflecting upon the highlight before it was gentrified and hyper-gentrified. I loved it over there because the streets were empty and still felt industrial, beautiful, old factories with smokestacks, rail yards, and empty warehouses. Just awesome, raw New York City. No condos. It was one of the last vestiges of the old grid in New York that I had known as a kid. When I first got up on the highlight, I realized that it encapsulated all that level of the area, perfectly preserved with gorgeous graffiti galleries everywhere. It was also striking how the vegetation has just naturally taken over and blended so perfectly on the main discordant elements. It was beautiful. This is highlight of 2003, okay? That's the vegetation he was referring to. It was a discordant part of Manhattan because it has a very industrial past. And this is also another image of the highlight in the 2000 or so, right before this entire wave of hyper-gentrification has happened. And now new condos where the highlight look like this. It's very international. Each of these condos sell for something like $2 to $5 million. Again, I remind everyone, it's not upper middle class, it's the wealthy and the elites who are moving in. And if you look at the last 10, 15 years ago, none of these highlight kind of condos existed. So right now, when you see along Highline, which is 10th Avenue, is this development boom. And every dot that you see on that map is a condo project that just came up over the last 10 years or so. And this is why we refer to these condos as the highlight huggers, because they're literally hugging the top. Okay, so this is highlight, a shot from the New York Times. You can see here as you're walking on the highlight. How many people have been to the highlight? Lots of you have. You're literally looking into the windows of those $2 to $5 million bedrooms. Okay, and it's fascinating because it's really so close to you. And you see this everywhere you walk, and our colleague also kind of one of the things that we noticed about this is the existence of basically social-economic mixing. So the New York Times ran this story literally a week after we went into the field. So basically every 3 months we get an article in the real estate section of the New York Times confirming everything that we were trying to do. So we were very encouraged because this article highlighted the experiences of Brandon Dees, who grew up in Elliott, Chelsea, which is the housing project around 26th Street and 10th Avenue. And then he won one of the lotteries for one of the affordable housing units in Chelsea Park, which is that brand new condo on 28th Street and also 10th Avenue. He said, I used to live down the block in the project. Every time I come to my building, meaning the new building, I just put a smile on my face. Wow, I actually made it out of my environment. And he's paying $540 a month for a studio. Now, this is why it's referred to as a lottery, because we have for 50,000 applications, we have like 10, 15 units. So the affordability piece of that is interesting because that's part of the policy implication, right? Which is these are supposedly 80-20 units, which is 8% market rate, 20% affordable. But the affordability is not anywhere near the amount of housing we need as a city, because the need is enormous. So back to the poor door, rich door controversy. That building is now completed, and as of last Monday, there were 88,000 applications for something like 15 units. And I calculated, okay, the process would basically yield an admission rate, to just borrow our Columbia College admission process, of 0.000006% of you're getting one of the units. So this is more competitive than getting into Columbia. And that is problematic because we need a lot more of that. To just end here and wrap up, I argue this project that global elites have basically brought about is hyper-gentrification, which leads to displacement of the middle class, which then led to them searching for better areas to go to, and then led to the gentrification of the working class areas, which then lead to displacements of the working class. Now, as a New Yorker, I will tell you this, and I teach a class on immigrant New York, so I send students into different parts of the city, so they go and they see lots of changes happening. That's actually a given for New York City, because neighborhood change is almost inevitable to happen. But there are clear winners and losers in this process, and I think that the losers are clear, which are the people with the low RICS ladder, who are often homeless and also lacking in the resources that, of course, the people at the top can bring about. And finally, I'm happy to talk more about inclusionary zoning policy, which is the policy that really put 80-20 on the table as an affordable housing strategy. And my argument there is simply that it's nowhere adequate. And more importantly, as a city, and as we change, we have to think about how the city is changing, our neighborhood culture, our identity, and also our future. So with that, I will end by acknowledging my wonderful students. There were like 25 people working in this project, but some of them graduated, moved on. The current research team has 6 doctoral students, all in sociology, and those are people in yellow. And with that, I look forward to your comments and questions. Thank you.